PS2 guy.
The PlayStation 2 library is so huge that even 7 years into its life, it was still getting games that felt like a big deal. Welcome back to This Week in PlayStation 2 History for May 17th through the 23rd. This week is a good example of why the PS2 still deserves so much respect. We've got a spooky childhood favorite from 2002, and then two very different games from 2007 that showed that the system still had plenty of life left in the tank. So if you ever thought the PlayStation 2 basically was done once the newer consoles showed up, this week is a pretty good reminder that it definitely wasn't. Let's get into it. On May 20th, 2002, THQ released Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights. And honestly, this game turned out way better than most people expected. This wasn't just some cheap licensed game thrown together to slap a cartoon name on the box. It actually felt like a real love letter to the old Scooby-Doo cartoon. You play as Scooby, exploring this huge mansion and the surrounding areas, trying to rescue the rest of Mystery Inc. as you go. And what makes it cool is the way progression works. You just don't run through the game in a straight line. You keep finding snacks that unlock new abilities, which let you go back and open up areas you couldn't reach before. It's pretty impressive for a Scooby-Doo game. That's a big reason it stands out. It gives the whole thing more structure than you'd expect, and it makes the mansion feel like a real place you're gradually learning your way through. And then you've got all that stuff that makes it feel like Scooby-Doo. The monster cameos, the laughing track, even Don Knotts doing voice work. That combination really nails the vibe. For anyone who grew up in the early 2000s, this game is basically a nostalgia machine. And if you had it back then, you probably remember it more fondly than a licensed game probably should be remembered. Now, from there, we jump into something a lot flashier. Released on May 22nd, 2007, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End brought the movie energy right to the PlayStation 2. And by this point, yeah, the PS2 was definitely in its later years. But games like this are why I always say the system still had some life left in it. This wasn't just a weak movie tie-in. It actually had a decent amount going on. The combat is built around flashy swordplay, and it really does feel like the game wants you to fight like Jack Sparrow would. Quick, stylish, and chaotic. That's probably the best thing about it. It understands the tone of the movies, which a lot of movie games completely miss. You also get to visit some memorable locations like Singapore and Shipwreck City, and that helps the whole thing feel bigger than you might expect from a late PS2 release. For a game based on a movie franchise, it does a pretty solid job of making you feel like you're in that world. And honestly, that's all a lot of people really want from a game like this. It's not trying to reinvent anything. It's trying to give you a fun pirate adventure with enough style to keep it interesting. And on the PS2, that was still very much possible in 2007. But the next game on this list is probably the most impressive from a pure artistic standpoint. Also released on May 22, 2007, Odin Sphere is one of the most beautiful games ever put on the PlayStation 2. This is a vanillaware game, so right away you know the visuals are going to be a huge part of the experience, and this one looks like a painting come to life. While a lot of games in that era were trying to go bigger and more realistic with 3D graphics, Odin Sphere went in the opposite direction and doubled down on hand-drawn sprites, rich colors, and gorgeous layered backgrounds. And that choice paid off big time. It gives the game a style that stands out immediately, even all these years later. But it's not just a pretty game either. It's also a pretty serious action RPG. You play through the story with 5 different protagonists, all tied to this big Norse mythology-inspired world. And the combat is fast, fluid, and built around managing sphere energy so you can hit harder and cast stronger abilities. So yeah, it looks artistic, but it also plays like a real game with some bite to it. And like a lot of ambitious PS2 games, it could push the hardware a little too hard at times, especially when the screen got crowded. But honestly, that almost adds to the charm, because even when it gets a little messy, you can still see how much was being asked of the system. This is the kind of game that reminds you just how creative developers could get on the PS2 when they weren't worried about doing what everybody else was doing. It wasn't trying to be normal, it was trying to be memorable, and it absolutely succeeded at that. From solving mysteries with Scooby-Doo to sailing the 7 seas, to fighting through Norse mythology, this week shows how much range the PS2 had. That's one of the things I love most about this console. You can go from a childhood nostalgia game to a late-era pirate adventure to a hand-drawn action RPG masterpiece, all in the same week. And it somehow still feels like the system had more to give. 3 completely different games, 3 totally different moods, and all of them proof that the PS2 never really stopped being interesting. But now I want to know your pick. Are you going with the 2002 nostalgia of Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights, the pirate chaos of Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, or the artistic brilliance of Odin Sphere? Drop your answer in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe for more PS2 history. I'm Dan Gnadt, the PS2 guy, and I'll see you in the next one. Remember, stay retro.
Midnight strikes!